Welcome to today's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hagley, and this is the show where we break down what it takes to build elite strength, conditioning, and athleticism for the everyday athlete. In today's episode, we're diving into something every athlete deals with. How fast do you actually lose progress when life starts to get busy or your training priorities shift? We're talking about training residuals. How long strength, endurance, and power really stick around once you stop training them. I'm going to break down the science, share how I'm using this right now in my own high rocks prep, and give you some simple ways to keep your hard-earned gains even when training isn't perfect. Hello everyone. So I just got back from a week in Florida. I was beachside, relaxing, did a couple of runs in the heat. Nothing that was too intense. No like lifting, no high rock circuits or, true like Metcon work or really anything that involved being inside of a gym. I'll be honest, I did a couple runs out in that Florida heat and that wasn't fun. I mean, there was a couple runs that were supposed to be easy that, my heart rate was like 185 and I was, just dripping buckets of sweat. But, nonetheless, during that time, I hadn't really trained inside of the gym. There was about an 8-day period where I did not, touch a gym. I didn't hit any strength training. And the idea for this episode, today's topic kind of came whenever I was writing my programming for that week. And so, if you're unfamiliar, I'm basically I started about a 20-week prep. I'm about 15 weeks out now. But I'm doing like a 20-week prep for a high rocks event towards the end of November. And so I knew that I was going to be going on this trip and needed to, to basically try to maintain strength because I knew the type of facilities that are in the area. I wasn't going to be able to have access to a row erg or a ski erg or wall balls or back squat or, anything. I mean, the facility that's, where our condo is has, a couple of dumbbells that go up to about 40 pounds and they have a treadmill. And I did use the treadmill, but I knew that I was not going to be, doing any true training like I have access to at home. And so with that, I started going back to my, some of my notes that I have built into a portfolio that I use for programming and in reference the residuals. This was one thing that I kind of talked through, and basically what training residuals are, right, is kind of how long does the adaptation that you've made stick around? So how long can we go without training a certain component of your fitness, whether it's strength, power, endurance, aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacity, whatever it may be. And so today I want to unpack what those training residuals are, what a lot of the research says, and how we can use that when we're programming to program and train smarter, maintain these key adaptations, and avoid losing out on a lot of the hard-earned progress that we've been making in the gym. So as I kind of touched on, training residuals refer to how long a specific physical quality sticks around once you stop training it directly. So kind of a way to think through this is adaptations are kind of like a campfire. Some logs smolder for hours. These are your big tree trunk logs, right? Others, though, on the other hand, burn fast. They fizzle out quickly. And your training qualities are no different. Strength and aerobic endurance are those big logs. Those are the slow burners. We can hold on to a lot of the adaptations that we've made for a long time. Whereas speed and power, on the other hand, they vanish quickly if they're left untouched. And so we can use this in my example from vacation. And then also whenever I'm writing this high rocks program, a lot of the concern that I initially had was, well, shoot, man, I haven't ran more than 5 miles a week in years. I mean, there was a time back, around COVID where I had done sort of a triathlon prep. There I was probably pushing a couple of 16 to 20, 25 mile weeks. But since that, that time period, about 4 or 5 years, I really have not run consistently for a long period of time. And so one of my concerns was, well, shoot, like I'm going to start to lose a lot of the strength that I've been working hard these last 3 or 4 years to build in my squat and in my bench press. But again, going back to this topic of residuals, I know that if I just apply enough stimulus, I like to think of stimulus as medicine, right? It's a pharmaceutical drug, right? If we are able to dose it just right, we can maintain a lot of what we've worked hard to build. And so this concept of residuals comes, originally from the Soviet Eastern Bloc sports sciences. So folks like Isharin, Verkhoshansky, Zatsiorsky, they noticed that elite athletes could still maintain their fitness qualities with a minimal dose of training. And so why does this matter? Why do I think that this topic is important enough to talk about on a podcast? Why does this matter for the everyday athlete? And ultimately, it's because your training time is limited. And if you know what qualities start to decay the fastest, then you can program more effectively. You can reduce your fatigue because you don't need to be touching on things as frequently. And you can prioritize the things that matter the most in your current training block with your current priorities. And so for me, my current priority now is becoming a runner. To train for a Hyrox event, I'm going to have to run a lot more. And so I'm going to have to put strength on the back burner a little bit. I still want to maintain it, but I'm not looking to grow it right now. I'm just trying to hold that line. And that's going to change how I'm training. So let's go a little bit deeper and look at what the literature says along with decades of coaching. What does this all suggest? So whenever we look at max strength, we can maintain our max strength for around 30 days. Aerobic endurance is right up there, about 30 days. But now, once we start to get into anaerobic capacity, we're looking at around 18 days. Hypertrophy, only 15. Power, 7. And speed, only 5. These aren't just abstract numbers. They're tied to the real physiological mechanisms. And so knowing what's happening physiologically helps us to understand how we're able to maintain these attributes that I just listed off. And also why max strength and aerobic endurance can last for so long versus speed can only last about 5 days. That's less than a week, right? And so let's kind of get into that a little bit so that we can better understand this. So strength, as we know, right, it's maintained by motor unit recruitment, central nervous system adaptations, and retained myonuclei within the muscle. And this persists for weeks after a training pause. Endurance, likewise driven by mitochondrial density, red blood cell count, capillarization, so how much blood is getting into the muscle. And these structures, they take a long time to build, and then they also take a long time to degrade, which is good, if we're looking to maintain endurance. Now, anaerobic capacity relies on glycolytic enzyme activity, which fades a lot quicker. So think here like lactate threshold. That starts to fade a lot quicker, about 18 days. And then power and speed, these are high skill, high neuromuscular driven qualities that they decay very fast if you don't basically remind your nervous system every week that you need to be using these. And so the takeaway from all that is the sharper the skill, the faster it's going to fade. The deeper the base, so think like our aerobic base, the strength base, the longer it's going to hold. So again, personal case study here to make this real, right? During my last heavy strength cycle, which was, my true last heavy strength cycle was honestly last December, but I've still been maintaining through there. But I've been maintaining strength for quite a while. So I haven't gone super heavy, but I've still been mostly focused on strength. But I was squatting about twice a week. I was dragging sleds. I was pulling heavy deadlifts. And now, since about the 1st of July, my Hyrox training has ramped up, and I've needed to put that strength work in the backseat. Doesn't mean that I ditched it, but now I'm not hitting it every week, and I'm not hitting it nearly as hard. So about every 10 to 14 days, I'm still hitting like a heavy triple, a couple heavy sets, but I'm not hitting maximal strength. Now, whenever I come back to my strength work, I'm still right where I was in terms of what I could do for that given amount of load and volume needed. So let's say my back squat max was about 450. I'm probably using a training max right now. It's around 425. And then I'm taking about, for my heavy days, usually about 80 to 85% of that to try to maintain it. Now, I'm not going to be able to maintain 450 whenever I come back first of the year and start to train heavy again. That 450 is not going to be anywhere close, but I'm still going to hopefully be somewhere around 420, 405, somewhere in that range. Same thing with bench press, but I don't need to have that raw strength right now. So, this is all important because I'm not totally abandoning strength, but I'm just strategically maintaining it. And that's where the magic of these training residuals comes into play, right? I don't need to train it every single week. I just need to make sure that I touch on it, and especially touch on what is going to fade fast, and then try to sustain what's going to last. So how, in this high rocks prep, how am I building my program to, one, consider residuals, but then also, still be able to prepare myself for this high rocks event? And so just going to kind of break down real quick what a week in my programming looks like right now. Again, almost a 180. It's not entirely a 180, but it's pretty dang close. A full 180 from what I was doing as of, May and June would be a marathon. And right now I'm doing a high rocks event. So, I'm right touch 180 flip of where I was, because I'm doing a lot more running. I'm doing a lot more conditioning. So basically I'm doing on Mondays, my easy runs. So that for me is a huge flip. Mondays have been heavy squat for the last 6 years. And right now we're changing that up. Reason being, I need to focus and prioritize running. So we're going to hit an easy run on Mondays. Tuesdays are my full body strength days. Now, these look drastically different from how they looked even in June and July. Or pardon me, even in May and June. Because I'm hitting more of a full body, and I'm also not going nearly as close to max as I was. So I'm, basically on Tuesdays, I do some type of a deadlift. And then I touch on bench press. I touch on some pull-ups. I touch on some single leg work. But then I'm capping that session off with a finisher, because right now my goals are to build my engine, not to build my strength. So I'm hitting strength. I'm touching on about 80, 85%, but I'm then backing it back down. And then I'm finishing with some high intensity, erg work or kettlebell work or lunges or wall balls and that type of stuff. Now, Wednesdays are my speed days. So this is where I'm heading to the track, or I'm on the treadmill, usually hitting some type of repeats. So right now I've been doing anywhere from 400 to 800, 800 meter, 400 meter to 800 meter repeats. Going to start to pick that up a little bit into some 1K repeats. And then Thursdays, I'm taking the whole day off from strength and from a lot of that aerobic work. And I'm doing a little bit of zone 2, but it's, usually on a C2 erg, like the bike, or going on some outdoor walks, just trying to get about 30, 45 minutes of activity just to help with recovery. But I'm not doing anything that's really pushing the system, or I'm also taking the load off my legs from the running. Fridays for me are, again, going back to strength. This is a little bit lighter of a day. But we are doing like some Romanian deadlifts, landmine pressing, overhead pressing, some rowing, single leg work once again, and then just some back rows and that type of work. But again, full body, that's the key. And then I'm also finishing that with some type of conditioning. These are more of my sled days. So I'm doing sled pushes, sled drags, and then maybe some kettlebell carries, wall balls, things like that are more high rock specific. But those finishers are not long-term finishers. They're about, 10 to 15, 20 minutes, just to kind of get that heart rate elevated a little bit and get familiar with the movements, and then kind of back it back down. Then Saturdays, these are my long runs. And right now I've been about 50 minutes, give or take, trying to push that, over the next couple of weeks up to 60 to 75 minutes. And then taking the day off again on Sunday with some, light recovery. Might be on a bike, might just do some stretching, mobility, whatever it may be. So to kind of cap that off and summarize that, I'm doing basically 2 full body sessions per week. And before those full body strength sessions, I'm doing jumps. So I'm doing box jumps, broad jumps. I'm doing a little bit of power work. I'm also doing a little bit of explosive work in the upper body with like a med ball throw, med ball chest pass, some plyo push-ups. So I'm still touching on those, but then I'm just doing basically those 2 strength sessions a week. I'm getting in at least 3 solid aerobic / glycolytic sessions per week. And then I'm also giving myself plenty of time to still recover. So, right, if you are someone who can train 3 to 4 days a week, the same rules are going to apply. I try to train, 6 to 7 days a week. I love to train. I like working out. And if I can do something, I'm going to do it. So, but if you are someone who doesn't have that time or just that, desire to train that many times a week, you can still, use the same rules and prioritize what's decaying the fastest and then plan around what you need to maintain versus build. And so for busy professionals, dads, the athletes training for events like High Rocks or a marathon, a Murph, local races, whatever it might be, the concept of residuals is golden. This is what everyday athletes use. And a lot of you don't even know it, but too many people can panic whenever they start to miss a session or they take a week off. I was in that same boat for years. If I was going on vacation, I had to find a gym that had everything I needed, all the machines, all the weights. And I've flipped almost, completely because I know that I don't need that. I know that I can still maintain what I've been working hard over the last, 51 weeks to build. And I don't need to take a week off and I know that if I take a week off, I'm not going to lose everything that I've been working hard for. So if you start to understand residuals, then you can realize that just missing 1 week of lifting isn't going to erase all of that strength, all of the work you've been working so hard to build. So instead of overcorrecting, you can now train with more intention. You can, program more than just the effort, but you can use timing and physiology and strategy to build a program that works for you, that allows you to develop all these different qualities. That's why I enjoy the conjugate method, because we're training so many different things. But you can still use the conjugate method to kind of scale it back a little bit in terms of adding in conditioning and things along those lines, and still maintain what you've worked so hard to build. So some final takeaways here. Residuals help you train smarter and not harder. Knowing and understanding how long certain qualities last is a game changer in terms of how you can program and how you can manage your time. Second one is that speed and power fade quickly. These are things that if you're working to train them or maintain them, you've got to touch on them at least weekly, if not twice a week. So if you're, whenever I'm sprinting, whenever I program sprints and we're working on developing that high end speed, we're going to touch on it at least 2 times a week because it degrades so fast. Same thing with jumps. We still jump before every strength session because we've got to continually touch that ability to maintain it. The third one is strength and endurance are very resilient. You can hit them every other week and still maintain. Now, if you're looking to build, if you don't already have that base and you still need to build it, you're obviously going to have to touch on it more. But once you've got it built, then it's a lot easier to maintain. And then the last one is you do not need to do everything all the time. Just do the right things and do them at the right time. So if you're building a program of your own or you're following my programming, then just remember that train what you need and maintain what you've built and continue to trust that process. So I appreciate you all for listening, and I will catch you on the next one. That's it for today's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. If you got value from this, do me a favor, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who would benefit. And if you want more insights, exclusive training tips, and in-depth breakdowns of the latest research in strength conditioning, join my Performance Edge newsletter. It's my free weekly email where I cut through the noise and break down what actually works in training, nutrition, and performance. Sign up today at hagleystrength.com. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you next time.